when you're reaching that ceiling of 750,000, the bottleneck at that point is usually you, the founder yourself.
Passion, 9 times out of 10, is the biggest challenge that gets in the way of delegation.
Your own success has become a risk of you being your own failure because you've now built this machine and it's becoming too big for you to handle on your own.
There's not necessarily a right or wrong way of doing something as long as it achieves the overall outcome.
It is that false belief that control equals success. At this stage, by staying in control, you are creating the fastest path to stagnation.
You wouldn't be able to build 10-story flat on foundations for a bungalow. If you want to build your business to that level, you need to be able to make sure that you've got the right foundations in place.
So welcome to Beyond the Business. I'm Chris Gault. I'm the strategic business coach at CH4B. This series dives into what really drives scale, the shifts founders must make in leadership, mindset, funding decisions, succession planning, and the ecosystems that support lasting growth. So if you're ready to move beyond firefighting and build a business that's truly built to scale, you are in the right place. This episode is about the topic of from 750K to 5 million, the real scaling journey. And we thought it would make perfect sense for us to bring on one of our very own founders at CH4B, Nicola Buckby, as my guest for this first episode. So Nicola, welcome.
Hi, Chris.
Very
Thanks
much
for having me on.
That's all right. Thank you for coming. So today we're going to be talking about the 750K ceiling and why great founders can get stuck at that point in business. And I've got a few sort of stats that I'm going to use to help us get going with conversation and spur this on. So the first thing I want to sort of just bring up, because I think it's a great place to start and kick off, and I've got my notes here, is a 2014 Gallup survey. So it was a survey of CEOs, and it reported that companies led by founders with high delegator talent, so they had the ability to let go essentially, posted an average 3-year growth rate of 1,751%. So that's 112 percentage points greater than those with limited or low delegator talent. So what do you take on this from your experiences? What do you take from that stat?
Yeah, of course. So I can probably reflect on that in my own personal journey, but also apply some of the traits and thought processes that I've seen from business owners, especially working in the SME space, because a lot of us get into business because we have an idea, we have a passion, or we have something that creates warmth inside that we want to achieve or essentially strive to achieve. And I think passion 9 times out of 10 is the biggest challenge that gets in the way of delegation, because when you are passionate about something and you've got an idea, your businesses almost become your babies, your lifeblood, and essentially you want to protect what you're building and what you're working on as much as possible. And I think one of the challenges that myself in the past and also SMEs fall into is we're often doers. So we like to roll our sleeves up and we get involved and we take everything on. And then before we know it, we've got a to-do list as long as your arm, and time and various other pressures then come into play. So I think those that can delegate, and it is a skill and it is something that won't just happen, it's something that you need to build up over time, I think definitely have the stronger probability of succeeding. I think with me in the past, and I see it with the business owners that we work with, that they often become the bottlenecks in their businesses, and 9 times out of 10 it comes down to them relinquishing the reins, the responsibility, and actually delegating various tasks that will project and support the business to move forward on that growth journey. So I can completely understand and resonate with the stat. I think those that can delegate are definitely more likely to succeed or achieve their business roadmap or their growth or the stats or whatever it is that they're working towards as an outcome. The power of collaboration and working with others is definitely something that's going to expedite that process.
Okay. So And hopefully you won't mind me saying this, you've mentioned there you're quite a doer as well
Yes.
yourself.
Yeah.
What is it about the transition from the doing to becoming sort of the manager or the overseer, the managing the work rather than doing the work? What is it that paralyzes most founders when they come across that transition and they have to make it? Why do they freeze at that point?
I think there are multiple reasons. I mean, for me, it was always having a bit of a stuck mindset, I suppose, because I'm so used to doing something, or I've always been relying on me producing the result. Part of you almost becomes regimented into this is the way it's always been, so this is the way that it should be. And I think for me, actually delving into NLP, understanding how the brain works and key decision patterns and traits and how we approach thought in itself is something that definitely helped me to almost become more of a manager and an overseer than actually trying to do everything, because I think as business grows, you end up becoming jack of all trades, master of none, and then you end up completing tasks, but it's a slapdash approach, or you're not necessarily achieving what you want to achieve. So I think for me, it was definitely that shift in mindset and actually being able to coach and collaborate others and just open up the possibility that there are various ways of doing things, and that
Mm.
it doesn't necessarily have to be a regimented approach and how things have always been done or how you would typically approach things. I think the biggest shift for me was mindset and becoming more outcome focused, because often there's various ways to reach a destination or to reach an outcome, and there's so many different roads that you can go down to achieve that. There's not necessarily a right or wrong way of doing something as long as it achieves the overall outcome. So I think for me that was the biggest sort of gravitational pull, was around my mindset, and also having a good team, having that relationship, having that rapport, that you can trust individuals that are just as passionate as you to achieve those outcomes. So I think there are a number of reasons. I could probably go into quite a lot of detail on
Well,
each one, but yeah.
let's pick out a couple of things you said. So, you said the moment that it worked for you was that mindset shift. And, you and I, we've been on the same NLP courses. We know,
Yeah.
we understand a lot around that mindset. But if we take that step back a moment, before that mindset shift happened, it's about at that point, founders can get to that stage. And you were fortunate enough that you went on this NLP course. You also attended some other seminars such as Tony Robbins. You'd been in and experienced things that opened your mind to it. But there's a lot of founders that freeze and they haven't had the privilege of having that experience.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the word trust. You said having a team around you that you can trust. And I think that might be worth us picking at, because I've experienced through the work we do at CH4B, working with founders, that when you start asking them about, you've reached this stage and you now need to consider delegating to others, you can't do everything. There's this fear of lack of control, of how can I make myself vulnerable to hand over to others my business when, and we're talking about here, this ceiling of we've reached 750,000 and we want to just, they're really trying to break that first million before they want to get to that 5 million, but they want to break that first million and they get stuck there. Is it because there's this fear of it's a lot of hard work to build to a business of that size, and that's quite a lot of money, and there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. If your business is turning over that much money, you've probably got staff that are relying on you to pay them so they can pay their bills, look after their family. You're also trying to support your own family or your own aspirations. So it's that fear I think we want to look at beforehand. And you talked about the trusted team. Is there anything else that holds founders back at that ceiling mark, that other than the fear, do you think?
I think there's a number of things. I think fear definitely does play a part, especially when you are so used to doing everything, so used to holding all of the reins and having that pressure building. I think fear is definitely one of them. Delegation, as you've touched on earlier, is another thing when you're so used to doing something a certain way and you're so used to having that responsibility, you're almost fearful of passing that responsibility on to somebody else. But I think ultimately one of the other things that business owners lack is that structure and guidance. I think if there was a clear plan and there were various levels of accountability that the business owners can refer back to or have as a sort of backup, if you like, it's that overall project management of that business and having the right structure, strategy, and checkpoints so that you don't feel that you're disengaged or you don't feel like you're losing that control. So I think a
Yeah.
lot, and we see it often with business owners, and I'm sure you will agree, Chris, from working with members in the strategy meetings. A lot of business owners might have a business plan, they might refer to it once a year, they stick it in the drawer, and then they're so caught up in their own heads with the day-to-day running and firefighting of running their business. But I think ultimately what those business owners need to realize is sometimes we become our own worst enemy and that we actually stop that growth. And again, it comes down to lack of planning, fear, and just being able to delegate effectively, in my opinion.
So essentially, and I probably agree with you on this from the experiences we have, when you're reaching that ceiling of 750,000, the bottleneck at that point is usually you, the founder yourself. Um,
Yeah.
you're not intentionally sabotaging your business, but at some level, you are bottlenecking, you are blocking the next stage of growth because you're too busy focused on the firefighting, which doesn't, you don't have someone pulling you out and going, stop, look at the bigger picture. Is what you're trying to overcome getting you past that firefight and leading you towards the vision? And it's because you don't have that structured plan for the next stage of business. And let's face it, it's because you said it earlier, you've got a passion, you've started a business, you've sometimes winged it. You've gone, right, well, I know that element of it and I'll work out the rest as I'm going. But you've now built a machine. Your own success has become your a risk of you being your own failure because you've now built this machine and it's becoming too big for you to handle on your own. And that's a hard thing to admit, but it's okay because pretty
Yeah.
much every business owner's been there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of it, I know I touched on thought earlier, and thought in itself is quite powerful. And I think sometimes we tell ourselves or we convince ourselves that things aren't true, but because of the thoughts that we're having and what we're associating to that change, that's another thing that we can discuss. There is also a fear around change and that reluctancy
Mhm.
to change through the fear of something not going as you planned or the fear of losing
Yeah.
control or whatever that may be, rather than attaching positive thoughts onto, well, what would happen if, or what could happen if. So again, it comes back to the mindset side of things, that often it's our own thoughts that are getting in the way of us progressing and getting to that next stage. And also sometimes it's a fear of collaboration, the fear of letting go. That, and don't get me wrong, in my journey, I found it really difficult to transition from working in the business, doing everything, to then overseeing and managing others, because you sort of question, well, what is your place in the business? What is my responsibility? What should I be doing now? And I think a lot of the time there's a lot of guilt that business owners carry because they don't always have the answers, or they don't really know and understand their place, because there has been that directional shift in their role and their responsibility within the business.
Yeah. Do you know what? You're right. And I think it is that false belief that control equals success. I'm in control. I'm being successful. Actually, at this stage, you are by staying in control, you are creating the fastest path to stagnation. The business isn't going to move on. And part of that, I always use the analogy: if you're on an aeroplane, the oxygen mask drops down. You've got to put it on yourself first, otherwise you're useless to everyone else. And that's what you're doing in this is by keeping control of everything. You are actually creating the very high risk of burnout, of decision fatigue, and you're creating a risk of becoming someone who focuses on micromanagement, which actually is a huge killer of the team you've got anyway. So if you do have a great team, you could delegate to, but you're not able to adapt to that change and shift that mindset, you're actually damaging what you've got supporting your business anyway.
Yeah, I think also, Chris, sometimes you can be too close to the project. So when you're in the business and you're always doing the work, you're not necessarily coming up with fresh ideas, or you don't necessarily give yourself that space to think, collaborate, and also look at the future plan of the business because you're so consumed in the day to day. And I think that's the other thing. It's not about looking at what you're going to lose or miss out on, or what that fear is from delegating or involving others within your business, but it's more focusing on, well, what could that achieve for me, and actually how often do I take a step back and have a bird's eye view on the business? If I was to collaborate with others, there might be fresh ideas that I haven't thought of because I'm so close to the business and I'm involved in it day in, day out. So I think there's definitely a number of reasons why a business owner struggles to sort of reach that next stage. But I think that there's definitely a lot of opportunity, and definitely the pathway for progression and growth should business owners take that next step.
Yeah. And Joy, it's that messy middle that you get that you're starting to lead into the conversation here. There's a stat I read here as well. The UK's number of employing small businesses, which are those most relevant to this 750K to 5 million we're talking about, they've generally failed to grow, or they've even slipped back in recent years, despite increases in non-employee firms. So, what we're getting at here is those businesses that are able to employ, they're still falling backwards. And is that because they're either employing the wrong people, or they're employing the right people, but not giving them the chance to be delegated to properly? What's your thoughts on that? Because, we've seen businesses who have gone, right, I'm growing, employ, and then
Yeah.
everything starts to still fall around and they don't understand why. They've got more resource. Surely it should go well.
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, let's not um shy away from the fact that recruitment is probably one of the top three biggest challenges or pain points for any business owner when it comes to recruiting, not necessarily having the right roles or the right spaces filled, or the people coming into the business, but there's various other challenges when it comes to sickness and managing people and projects, etc., etc. But I think it again, it links back to business owners being too close sometimes to the business. And only recently, I met with a construction company, and they were adamant that they needed a sales director in their business, and that this sales director was actually going to solve all of the problems. It was going to prevent the stagnation that they were seeing in their business, and it was going to project them to the next level, which enabled them to achieve the outcomes and goals they were working towards. And through a conversation and just asking some pretty basic questions, it became quite clear to me that they didn't actually need a sales director at all, but actually where the holes were in their leaky bucket, if you like, is actually their operations. So it wasn't the fact that they lacked structure or they needed somebody to come in and to direct the sales funnels, etc. But actually what they needed was an operational manager to come in and look at the various stages of the projects and where things were falling through the net. And I think just from that initial conversation, it became clear to those business owners that that is something that they needed. But for a while, they'd convinced themselves that the problem was over here. So I think 9 times out of 10, it's just from conversation, by asking the right questions and understanding potentially where those bottlenecks or those challenges or those breaks are within their business, and also flipping their mindset to a more outcome focused. It's this is the outcome that we want to achieve. Okay, well, now let's reverse engineer that and look at what needs to happen over here for us to reach that outcome.
Mm.
And 9 times out of 10, I see a lot of businesses recruiting because they think that they need somebody in that role, not
Yeah.
necessarily because they understand what outcome that's going to generate for them in their business.
Mhm.
And then, of course, it's them finding those individuals with the set of skills that it is that they're looking for, and how that interrupts the general day to day of their working patterns. As you'll know, Chris, there's then screenings, there's interviews. If you're using a recruiter, there's then finders and recruiters fees. So it can be a very costly mistake for business
Yeah.
owners if they don't get it right. So I suppose that's why it's really important to have these conversations up front, and really understand and be clear on
Mhm.
what do we need and where those gaps are in the business, without sort of taking the time to work back that
Yeah.
strategy.
And it's these decisions that are being made at this, at this 750K ceiling that create the margin squeeze when people are going, economists, the media, there's even something I read from the British Chamber of Commerce that they've implied service firms have faced significant margin squeeze, often attributed to rising input costs and labour costs. And then it goes on to say, the next quote is, profit margins for many remain tight, with a lasting rebuild expected to take years rather than months. Now, this I find really interesting because it follows what you've just been saying there as well. Is we make these decisions, we've reached this ceiling, let's get more staff. We need, you used your example of, we need this sales director. They're going to come in and they're going to sort out our sales process. They're going to magically fill up the funnel and everything's going to be okay. And actually, the water still came out of the leaky bucket that you described. But it's these hidden costs of the wrong hires, the costs that go with it, but then that also creates the wasted time that has a cost attached to it. Other staff get frustrated, and so you start getting a turnover of staff that has a cost to it. And then starting to go, well, I need to invest in new bits of tech, and you're choosing the wrong ones because you haven't got this plan. All these different hidden costs that you don't notice linked to that one decision you made because you thought you were overcoming the main problem starts creating those margin squeezes. So even if you do grow the revenue, you're not making, the profits seem to be decreasing.
Yeah, I think as well, when you get to that stage in your business and you are um you know that you need to bring other levels of expertise in the business, or you know that you need to hire those individuals that have got the caliber and experience to be able to come in and support where you are in your business. That also has a price associated to it, and you often see roles on Indeed where there's no salary advertised or there's no salary bracket. And I think again, fear creeps in for a lot of these business owners and says, right, are we really at a stage where we can afford to take on somebody with a 40, 50 grand basic salary or level of skill set or whatever that looks like? Whereas actually the question that we should be asking is, well, can we afford not to do it, on the basis of what you're going to get from that? So I think again it comes down to an element of fear when it is such a big financial investment, depending on the roles and the level of roles that you're looking to recruit for in a business. I think, as you mentioned, it's the challenges of not getting it right and those cost implications there as well. And also, I think it comes down to the fact that you need to really give somebody a 3 to 6 month period of time to embed in the business, to get to know you, your business, your operations, for them to learn their role and what they're being brought in to do. And I think sometimes it's very easy to make a knee-jerk reaction or to pull the plug on something without giving it that time. So I think when it comes to recruitment as well, we also need to be mindful of what that return on investment is going to be in the short term, because it
Mhm.
could take 3 to 6 months to get somebody to a point before you can start delegating various tasks to them, or they sort of embed and get used to you and their role within the business. So it's definitely something where time plays a part. I think cost, and also an element of fear again, that I know we've
Yeah.
discussed and covered in various areas.
Well, yeah, I think we've covered here, quite extensively, and I say quite extensively. There's always room to keep going on these areas, but we've discussed obviously those ceilings and those bottlenecks and barriers that you hit at that 750K mark. Let's sort of shift over towards the necessary shift that people need to make, sort of the path to the 5 million mark. How do they get past that 750? And I think we've picked up a few things during this first part of the conversation that I want to explore a bit more. We talked about working on the founder first and them getting the right mindset to be able to go on this journey. We've talked about the systems and the strategy to get there. We've talked obviously about cash and having the right financial decisions and the right finances there to support. And then you've mentioned about accountability and external guidance. So let's take those four areas in particular. Let's start with the founder. So, the core idea, we work at CH4B, as you know, on our business growth blueprint, supported by the 12 principles of growth within business, where we look at the 12 key elements that every successful business nurtures and looks after to ensure they've got a successful business. That's having a clear vision, a plan, and that you're executing that consistently. Looking at your streamlining of operations and your bottlenecks, making sure you're managing cash flow, that you've got your metrics to guide you and to ensure you're making data-driven decisions, looking at sales and marketing, your team and culture, and ultimately protecting what you've built. So as you grow, you know that your assets, your finances are going to be secure. And we do that through our business growth blueprint. And that key element is the vision, the purpose, and it starts with the founder. But before you can start that, you get the pushback of where do I find the time to do this strategy planning that you talk about? Well, here's a little hint for you. It's through the streamline principle that we will get to, but we need you to shift that mindset and focus on those outcomes first. So from your experience, how did you get past these bottlenecks so that you could start scaling your time, not just the sales?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because let's face it, there's only a certain amount of hours in the day, and most business owners have put 10 different hats on before 10 a.m., depending on their business and what it is. I think for me, it always comes down to um, I think time blocking is definitely one because sometimes, and I even still find it now, I get to the end of the week and I go, oh, what have I achieved this week? And where's all my time gone? Because you might have a call from a client that takes you off of what you were due to do. But I think the biggest thing to consider is nothing's going to change. And if anything, things will get worse unless you can learn to delegate and take a step back. I know we do it in our business at the moment, but obviously AI and embracing technology and using all of these new tools in the business can really help to improve productivity. But again, it comes down to time to learn and understand them. I think ultimately you need to make a decision in business, and it comes down to, well, can you afford not to? And how desperately do you want to get to that next stage of the business? What are those gravitational pulls? Because we all have the same amount of hours in a day. We all have the same amount of working days in a week. It comes down to prioritizing and making that shift because yes, you could invest an hour or 2 hours a month, which isn't a lot. Like in principle, it's not a lot. Whether you do it at the beginning of the day, at lunchtime, at the end of the day, taking an hour out of the business to work on your strategy and your plan could actually end up saving you countless hours in the long run, especially if you can learn a new piece of tech or there's various processes that you can put in place. And as we've touched on earlier, delegate. Is there one task that you can delegate in your working week that will free up that time for you to invest on taking your business to the next level? I think if businesses are at a point where they're looking to scale, they're looking to go to the next level, they should be in a position where they're prepared to set aside at least an hour a month to look at the plan and the
Yeah.
scalability on how you can get there, because it comes back to what we said when we launched CH4B. It's all about building the foundations to support that growth moving forward. You wouldn't be able to build a 10-story flat on foundations for a bungalow. So
Mhm.
if you want to build your business to that level, you need to be able to make sure that you've got the right foundations in place. And the only way to do that is to take time out to look at the overall strategy and the plan for the business.
And you use a good, I think a relatable analogy there with the building. For anyone that's seen a house being built, and you just have to walk up most residential streets to see there's a new house being squeezed into a tiny plot of land. But the longest thing is them getting the foundations right, and then all of a sudden bricks start building up upon it. But it's because they've taken the time to get those foundations right. And that's what business owners need to do. We've all got the same 24 hours in a day. As you said, it's about how you prioritize the use of those. You could keep doing the same things over and over again and expect a different result, but it's not going to happen. It's going to keep taking you the same amount of time. But if you review your processes and you take an hour or two now to put a plan in place and then go away and execute the things that are going to start moving the needle elsewhere, you will save that time and more in the future. Look at as a founder, look at what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and go, can it be delegated? Can it be automated? Ask yourself, why am I doing it in the first place? Can I delete it and get rid of it? And if not, then yes, you need to do it. But so many people don't do those first things of, can someone else do it? Can it be automated? Or question themselves, why are we doing it anyway? You said it near the very beginning of this conversation. Well, it's the way we've always done it. Yeah, doesn't mean it's right. You know,
Yeah.
can you not just get rid of it? So I think that's right. Scaling your time is about investing at the beginning, investing that time at the beginning to get a plan together, to analyze what you've got and make a few small adjustments that will make a huge adjustment at the end. And I think that leads into the second thing I said about having the power of process. So
Yeah.
what does system mean in an SME? Because it's not bureaucracy, it's consistency. You talked about finding ways to do things and doing it well. It's mapping those 5 to 7 core repeatable processes that will allow a business to start running without the founder's intervention. So what does the power of process from your experience look like?
I think it really sort of depends on how you, well, one, the industry and the business that you're running and working in, but also it's looking at what cogs need to turn for that business to operate. So it comes down to business operations, finance, the general sort of overview of a business, and then the key performance and the growth indicators. Often as business owners we're running in the dark because we don't have those key performance indicators, or we don't have those outcomes clear enough for everybody to understand what it is that we're working towards as a business. Yes, a business owner might have it up here, but have they communicated that to the wider team? So I think, and we use the business growth blueprint within the businesses and those that we work with. And all of that comes down to having that one-page business plan, that strategy on a page that essentially looks at various areas of the business, and it's broken down by sales, operations, finance, and the team. And ultimately, it's a clear plan as to where the business is now, where they want to get to, and there are other tools that we can use and bring in to see where the key focus areas needs to be for a business. I think just coming back onto the other point that you made, Chris, I think it's also when we look at put that time and taking out an hour a day, or an hour a month, sorry, at least, to look at the business. We talked earlier about fear and delegation and what's potentially holding businesses back. If we have this plan and we have this strategy on a page and everybody shares the same vision and the values of the business and where you're moving towards, actually, by investing that 1 hour a month or 2 hours a month in taking a step back, having a bird's eye view and an overall analysis or check in on the business, you'll probably find that it saves you a lot of time elsewhere, because as you do start going through those lists, you can
Yeah.
build that confidence to delegate to other people. So you might find that actually you then free up a lot more time by investing that 1 hour, whether it be via automation or delegation. But I think ultimately, coming back to the question that you've just asked me and what that looks like to me, I think it looks at breaking the key fundamentals of a business and having clear outcomes for each of those, and not getting in your own way with the thoughts that we attribute to each
Yeah.
part of those.
And it's interesting because you say looking at the outcome, but there is you need the outcome because you need to know where you're getting to. And you mentioned our business growth blueprint because you were talking about you need to look at all the areas, the financing, the team, the operations, the sales. That's what the blueprint's about. It's getting you looking at all areas of the business and how they interact together, but also the finer details within each of those, transferring that to the business success roadmap, which is your one-page document plan that has your key metrics on, so you're making data-driven decisions that gives you those outcomes that you're aiming for. You then need to create, using some outcome architecture, how do you get from where you are to where you need to go? And a lot of founders, to do that, it's the power of process that I was getting to. It's how do you turn those processes or automate those processes to remove the unnecessary steps that are being taken? The admin that doesn't need to be done by a human, the step that we've always done it this way, but it actually isn't needed. And when I speak to some founders and I say, so tell me about your sales process. Oh, well, a lead comes in, we have a meeting with them, and then they either buy or they don't. That's not actually the process, though, because that's 3 steps. The lead turns up, you speak to them, they buy. Is that all that's included? And then when you start asking them to dive deeper, well, no, actually, the lead comes in, someone has to put it onto the CRM system. We then need to check the source it came from. We'll put them through a nurture campaign. Maybe the salespeople will send them a few emails, a LinkedIn request. We'll warm them up a bit. Then we'll put in a call. After that call, you can see where I'm going. Actually, there's a lot more steps to it. You take those 5 to 7 repeatable processes and you find a way of streamlining them with delegation, with automation, deletion of the unnecessary steps. You've suddenly saved yourself and your team a lot of time. You're already creating the power of process that scales your time and therefore will scale your sales and your business as well.
I think just on that, Chris, a lot of business owners can become quite static or quite regimented in the way that they work. And there's so many other challenges now that affect various businesses. There's obviously been a pandemic, there's been a change in government, there's been Brexit, and there's been all of these various challenges that impact SMEs on an ongoing basis. We had the budget recently that is going to then affect business owners going into next year and beyond. And I think one of the most powerful things for any business owner is to be able to have the ability to pivot and to be able to change and adapt processes or the way in which things are done or the way in which the business operates and runs, because every day in the future is unknown and nobody knows what could happen or what's going to happen. And I think the pandemic taught us a lot in business around that. And I think if you can pivot, if you can adapt to a changing landscape, and yes, you might have the systems and processes in place, and yes, you might have an idea on where you want to get to, if you can be open to the possibility that there are multiple ways to get there and that it doesn't have to go down one specific channel, you have a higher probability of success on the basis that there are various routes that you can take to achieve that success, rather than going down one road and then find that it's blocked, and then we're like, okay, well, we'll give up on that then. So it's more about just having that flexibility and the ability to pivot and change, which is another thing that we've touched on briefly. I think one of the biggest things holding a lot of business owners back is the fear that surrounds change,
Yeah.
and actually doing things differently. So yeah.
And I think there is, change is inevitable. It's going to happen, but it does create uncertainty and therefore fear. I think
Yeah.
one of the other things I experience when I'm working with founders, through CH4B a lot, is them going, well, to make all these changes, it's going to cost me money. And so I need to increase my revenue and I need to increase my sales. And actually, I'm going to say now that cash flow is what provides you the resilience, not your top line revenue. Now, don't get me wrong, you need to make sales or the business isn't operating. But if you can move your focus from sales to cash flow resilience, then actually you're starting to allow yourself to introduce more simple disciplines. So one of the things you should be looking at with your business is pricing what you offer for future growth. A lot of people go, my competitors charge this, or this is the standard, so that's what I'm going to charge. Well, no, no. What value do you deliver? And to reach where you want to go, how much money are you going to need to get there? What staffing are you going to need? Price based on that. Because if you don't get your pricing right, you don't have the cash flow, you are going to lack the resilience, the business resilience you need to continue past that 750K ceiling to the 5 million that we're talking about reaching.
That's the thing, and I think you don't always have to reinvent the wheel every
No.
time. I mean, what could be stopping a business owner getting from 750 to the next stage could just be a pricing review. There is a lot of change that happens in business, and a lot of the time individuals don't, as you said, focus on value pricing. It's because, oh well, that's what the competition is, or that's the rate that
Yeah.
they're used to paying. And I think a lot of the time when businesses think of growth, they think, oh, actually, I need to generate new sales, or I need to increase my customer base, etc. When actually a lot of business owners are already sitting on a huge opportunity with their existing clients that they've got and they're working on. Are there cross-sell opportunities? How often have they reviewed their pricing? How are those services being priced, etc.? And I mean, we've seen it, and the impacts that it's made with some of the members that we've seen, that actually sometimes you can be too cheap and price yourself out the market, and actually a small change, which could be a 1% or 2% price increase, could get your business to that next level. But business owners are fearful of losing that business through fear of upsetting people by putting the prices up. But ultimately, the landscape that we all live, breathe, and work in is constantly changing, and even updates or government shifts or changes in the budget will impact all of those businesses. And it comes back to what we said earlier about being able to pivot and being able to look at various mediums or areas of the business that can contribute towards that overall
Mm.
outcome. If you don't have a plan and you haven't broken each part of your business down, then you might not necessarily see those opportunities or how easy it would be to get to that next financial level. I think the other thing is looking at, well, how do businesses account? Because typically a lot of businesses will look at their income, they would then minus the expenses and then look at what is left in terms of profit or reinvestment, etc. Whereas actually now a lot of businesses, and I know we adapted that methodology, well, what would happen if you took your profit out first
Yeah.
and then you looked at what you needed to scale and
This
take
is
your
it.
business to the next step?
We've all gone into business because we want to make money. So why aren't we focusing on the profit first?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because all you're actually doing is, oh, my business is worth X amount. No, it's not, because you haven't got any money at the end of it. And that might feel like a bit of a harsh message to send out to those watching this, but it's the truth. The truth is, you've gone into business for a reason. There might be a moral reason or something you're trying to overcome for your customers, but equally, you're not doing it for free. So
Mhm.
prioritize yourself and your profit first, because actually that relieves so many other outside pressures that allow you to shift focus onto your business more as well. Um, and I think sort of just bringing this conversation towards a close as well is around, we talked about what you need to make this possible, being accountability and an external guide. And that is what CH4B is about, is giving that space, that ecosystem for people to do that. When you reach the 750K mark and you're trying to break that ceiling of the 1 million and then start getting towards that 5 million, I want to explore why external coaching and advisory support becomes non-negotiable at this stage, because you said something a moment ago that really stood out to me around um, it's having making those decisions, knowing which decision to make. And it's a case of sometimes you need that external person to push you to take the step that you're scared to make. So what's your thought on that? Because I know, and hopefully you won't mind me sharing, CH4B is about supporting other businesses, but I know as a founder yourself, you've gone and got external support to hold you accountable. So share some
Yeah,
about
100. Yeah, 100%. I think, well, you look at any professional sports person, name one that doesn't have a coach,
that.
ultimately. And when you get into business, so it can be quite lonely and it can be quite isolating. Now, I'm fortunate to have a business partner. We've worked together for a number of years. We know each other pretty well, and we could probably have quite in-depth conversations and quite honest conversations if we feel that one of us is looking at something subjectively or too much into the detail, if you like, which has often been my challenge, that I've strived for perfection and that unknown space. I think in the past I've really sort of struggled with, because I've liked to have the answers for everything. So I think we only know what we know, and we're experts in our area of expertise or our area of business. But from time to time, we need to understand that we can't be experts in everything.
Yeah,
And that's okay. I was expired the legal agreement. I'm not a solicitor. I'm not trained as a solicitor. I'm going to need expertise to support me to do that. The same when it comes to insurance. Yes, there are various insurances that we need that are mandatory. I have absolutely no idea when it comes to insurance to a point as to, well, what changes have happened recently since my last insurance policy? What should I consider for my renewal? And then there's experts that I can lean on, that I can seek their guidance, because that's what they do. That's their day in, day out. And it's the same. You wouldn't expect me to come and plaster your living room wall, for example, because I'm not a plasterer and that's not within my skill set. So I think it's worth recognizing that we can't be experts in everything. And
yeah,
from time to time, we do need to lend on that expertise from others and let people in and accept help and collaborate, because we don't know what we don't know. And I think when it comes down to coaching and getting that support within business, sometimes having that external party or that individual that's not in your day to day, they're not as close to the business, and just being able to talk, to be asked some really challenging questions that, and sometimes not challenging, sometimes it's the most simplest question
mhm,
or the way something is positioned that is where we see those light bulb moments being created. And sometimes it's formed from simplicity, just from having a conversation like we're having today, and new ideas are generated from us giving ourselves that headspace. So I think a lot of business owners look at coaching or business support or advice as a weakness, rather than attaching themselves to the opportunity and the positive thoughts that can come from that.
yeah,
Um, a lot of business owners will go networking. They will meet other business owners in the room. They will all talk. They will build their network and they will collaborate. It's no different from coaching, just on a one-to-one, getting to know your business, what it is that you're wanting to achieve, and ultimately how we can work together to make that inevitable and an outcome.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned it, you mentioned a good point there. You say, getting that one-to-one coaching, that external support, it's a need for a neutral party to hold the founder, the CEO accountable to the system, not the emotion. So I can sit there with a founder, and actually, I want to stress this. You mentioned you're lucky enough to have your business partner. But equally, that's unlucky because you're still both
Yep.
very heavily involved. You
It's
both,
a blessing and a curse.
yeah, having that. So it's not coaching is not just for solo founders. It can be for multiple, two, three, four directors of a company. That external party that's not as emotionally attached as you, that they've got that emotional disengagement, who can take it back to the facts, the systems, the outcome you're trying to achieve, and go, look, let's just strip emotion from one side. You've got your opinion, you've got your opinion, and we both need to understand those perspectives. But what is going to help the outcome that we're all trying to achieve? We're just coming at it from slightly different angles. How do we create full alignment to work towards that? And I think that is, a great message to almost bring this conversation almost to an end on. Is we want to talk about, on Beyond the Business, we want to talk about what drives real success in business, those shifts you need to make as a founder on leadership, on mindset, funding decisions, succession planning. But it all starts with that plan you can deliver action, and making sure there is alignment working towards it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it comes down to having real support, real results, and a real partnership. Because,
Mhm.
as you mentioned, there's something there that, yes, there might be four or five business owners, and sometimes it can be quite challenging to have those conversations, especially if emotion is attached. And how do we know that we're all still working in the same direction and we still want the same outcomes for one another that we wanted when we set the business up? And actually, we all feel differently about various changes in life, in business, and we have our own personal
Mhm.
challenges that also affect the navigation and the structure of working in business and our careers and where we want to move to moving forward. So I think sometimes just having that safe space where you can have that conversation, you can share what it is that we're working to achieve, checking in. Do we still share that vision? Do we still share that same 5 or 10 year plan of what we want to achieve? And ultimately, I think the biggest thing is it shouldn't be seen as a weakness, that actually having a coach or somebody else beside you that is external to your business can provide fresh ideas, a fresh perspective, and
Mm.
also a level of accountability that you may not necessarily hold yourself to. It's really easy to have a to-do list and say, yeah, I'm going to do this. But if you've got a check-in or a productivity call or a strategy meeting with that coach, it's just that initial and that additional nudge in the right direction to
Yeah.
complete the tasks that you've highlighted that you want to achieve. So yeah, definitely. I think we can't be experts in everything. It's okay to reach out and gain support in various areas of business, and ultimately that's what's going to drive you to reach that next level.
Amazing. Thank you. I think I just want to end, you make a good point there. When we reach this stage in business, it becomes the messy middle. You need that clarity, that support to get, as I've just said, clarity, structure, and a plan to help you create immediate results, and focus on where you can get to and how you will get there. And that's what reaching out for support is about. This is why great founders get stuck, but how they overcome that to break through the 750K ceiling. So I think this has been hopefully a very insightful conversation for everyone that's watching and listening. So thank you obviously for sharing your input on that. I know we have many of these conversations together with our members as well, but it's really good to have it now and be able to get that and share it out there with other people. And I guess for anyone watching, I guess, and I'm sure you won't mind saying, what we want to say is if you have resonated with anything in this conversation and you want to take the conversation further to the next step, you can go on ch4b.co.uk. You can contact us, hello@ch4b.co.uk. Essentially, we're here to talk to you. We want to help you. Business owners out there, don't go at it alone. That's what we're about. Come and have a free conversation with us. Get to know us. Let's take it from there, because the first step, as you've said, is just accepting that actually it's not a weakness. It's a really brave, smart decision to go out there and seek some external help and support.
Yeah, 100%. And I think ultimately there is a full ecosystem there for you to benefit from. And ultimately, sometimes it's just nice to have a chat. I mean, for me, I love finding out about the business owners and what their outcomes are, what their journeys have been that have led them to where they have got to. And if there's anybody that I can connect anybody with, or any collaborations that I can support with, again, it's the reason why we created CH4B in the first place. So again, I'd welcome any conversation with anybody that wants to reach out.
Brilliant. Nikki, thank you very much for giving me your time for this
No
conversation.
problem.
This has
Thank you,
been
Chris.
no problem at all. This has been Beyond the Business, and we look forward to releasing the next episode for everyone to join us again.